Hello and welcome. I'm Catherine Davies. Today on Save Democracy, we welcome Arsen Yatsenko, a fifth-year Ukrainian doctoral student in political science and administration at Poland's Wroclaw University. Arsen researches NGOs and local communities in Ukraine and shares first-hand stories of the transformative power of community organising, volunteerism, and the vital role civil society can play in wartime and in defending and rebuilding democracy. He started young, after being pulled away from his computer in the summertime.
So this was 15, you're about 15?
Yeah, I would say like 14, 15 years old, 2012. My schoolmate, essentially someone who I was in one class spending like 9 years learning together, but never had any, interaction with him like we were being friends or something. We just know that we exist each other. Like that's like was the only thing essentially that bonding us was school. But school has ended, and this guy, he just called me randomly, like during the summer days. Probably it was the beginning of the summer. I was just doing my stuff regularly on the computer, probably playing some games, and he just randomly calls me and like, "Hey, Arsen, how you doing?" And back in the days, we didn't have like a phone calls like on the smartphones. Essentially, we were using just stationary phones at the home. So he knew my home address, phone number, right? He called me on that stationary phone, and I pick up. Firstly, I didn't know like who that was and why was he calling. But he was just like super friendly and telling, "Hey, Arsen, how are you? How are you spending your summer?" Well, I didn't want to lie because obviously my summer was quite boring at that time. So, but still, he started to be like super friendly and like, "Hey, yeah, we are doing some stuff. We're going on a festival. Do you want to go with us? Or maybe you're busy doing something important." And I was like, I don't know, man. Like I'm doing my stuff. What is the festival about? Nothing more. It's just a music festival. It's quite cool. We're gonna be volunteering there. We're gonna help folks, music bands, etc., cleaning the space and living in a volunteer camp. So it's gonna be fun. Like you should join us. I was like, who's we? Like who's we? What is it about? Yeah, well, we're just some group of initiative. I mean, it's just organization, nothing much. I was quite suspicious about that part because guy calls you out of the blue, inviting you for volunteering in a music festival. And, my impression on the music festival back in the days was quite bad because my older brother, he was in one music festival when I visited him. And it was like a punk rock music festival. And it was pretty gross, to be honest. It was quite disgusting scenery that I saw there. So I had quite a bad impression of that places. And I, tried to avoid it. So I rejected the opportunity. I told this guy, like, well, thanks for the offer. Thanks for calling me, essentially. And probably I'm going to pass this time. Well, man, you're going to regret this, but I mean, it's going to be fun. And I said, okay, yeah, thank you, bye. Okay, 2 weeks passes. I'm doing still my stuff, inside of the computer entirely. And he calls again. And I was like, oh, what this guy wants? Okay, I'm picking up the phone. And he was starting to, sharing with me some stories, how it was, how fun it was, this music festival, what things happened there. Well, sounds like an adventure. And I was like, okay, yeah, nice. Why are you telling me this? And then he starts to say, you know what? We're going to organize some camp. It's a camp for youngsters. It's going to be not far from the region, like essentially we live in. It's Lviv. Obviously, it was like 20 kilometers from Lviv, I guess. So not really far, but still out in the woods. And he said, like, do you want to come with us? And first, I still didn't know what kind of group he's talking about. I was like, man, like, what is it about? Like, is it like a religious group or something? Is it like a political party or anything? And he was like, no, nothing like that. I mean, we're not religious. We're not like backing up some political party. We're just, hanging around, doing some nice stuff, we're spending a good time together. And it's nice. I didn't kind of believe it, but all of this looked quite strange to me. So I told him, and my rejection strategy was just to tell him that, I don't have any equipment. I don't have like a sleeping bag. I don't have like a sleeping mattress or any of this stuff. I don't have a tent. So, I mean, it's not for me. And he told me, like, man, don't worry. We're going to find you all the stuff. Like, it's going to be fine. It's not that, dangerous, or it's not that, you don't need to be prepared that much. And I was like, I don't know, man. Like, I'm quite skeptical. Let me think on that. So I hang on the phone, like 2 hours passes. He knocks to my door. And first thing I see, I'm just opening the door. He just throws a sleeping bag inside. It was like, what the hell? Like, I was so surprised on this persistence. And, essentially, I started to think, okay, what I'm going to lose? I'm spending my entire summer. It's not the first summer that I'm just spending in front of the computer, not even outside, not even like doing some stuff or playing some games. I'm just like inside, curtains are closed. The life is passing by, outside of the window, and I'm just not even trying some stuff just to see how it is, right? So I thought, okay, I'll give it the shot. I'll try how it is. And eventually the day comes. We getting organized. We getting on the bus. We get on the place, and I see a lot of youngsters, young people like me, like 15, 16, 17 years old. All of them are quite chill and fun. There's no like any tension, or there's no some kind of hierarchy or subordination or anything. They know what they do. They know they came here for just spend a good time, having some fun, and etc. And we spent, I guess it was like 3 days in this camp. We were playing games, we were playing guitar, we were doing some bonfire, we were telling the story. We had some historian invited to this site, just speaking and giving us some lectures. And, at that time, something really life-changing happened. Because I understood one really important thing, that, okay, well, I was out of my bubble. I understood that there's like different people, different young people, my peers that exist, that have some values, that they have some view on this life. They want to work on self-development. They want to kind of open this world. They want to make it a better place, essentially. They want to kind of pursue some goals. So for me, it was kind of turning my world around 100 degrees, because back in the days, like, my peers were just interested in partying, alcohol, and doing some stupid stuff, essentially. And that's why I was isolating myself out, like, towards this. So it was kind of a problem. And then when I saw, okay, well, it's a whole new world exists out there, and I can be a part of it. And I felt myself like really comfortable, like with that person's, like with that people, and within that bubble, I felt, okay, well, I could find myself a purpose here. So, time passes. Obviously, it was not the last camp that we organized, but we went to hiking. Then we went on some championships even of hiking in Carpathians. It was just, every story was some kind of adventure. And probably, I don't know, like in my 50s or something, I'm going to tell this to my kids, and, sharing these adventures, because it was one of the probably prominent and brightest part of my teenage years, of that, adventures that we had, right? The same thing happened with the food for our camps. We also fundraised it. We found some guys, with
donating food.
Yeah, like donating food, donating like cans of food, like canned meat and etc. And it was, it was something that helped me to grow as a person, essentially, to this kind of, I'm not sure if I should call it like a business deal or something, but it was really fun. So they gave us a floor to organize our own projects. And we did. We did some lectures. We also did some camps. We did some hikings. We did some workshops. It was like a couple of nice years that we organized this stuff. But then, essentially, I felt myself that, okay, I'm growing into this thing, and there's other organization that, you could actually participate. But the leader of this, like the ex-leader, he went to work in the Lviv regional administration in the Department of Youth and Sport. Specifically, his department was focused on youth and collaborating with youth NGOs in Lviv region. And he was really good at it. it was really good times for the NGOs there.
So the department became more outward in its approach, reaching out to NGOs, and they weren't so much like that before.
Exactly. So you see, most of the governmental organizations back in the days, before the Revolution of Dignity, they were working on the, post-Soviet format. They just had a plan of activities, and they were following this plan with the budget they were assigned.
Got it.
And it was like really, from top to bottom communication.
Top
right?
down, yeah.
Yeah. And what changed essentially, that when Andrei Kowalski stepped in as a director, they started to help NGOs and help other organizations to, firstly, initiate something and support them in their initiatives. Not just, organizing some big event and, who wants to join, then will join. But they started to kind of work from the grassroots, I would say. And it was tremendous shift because probably, this organization, they didn't have any kind of this governmental support back in the days. They didn't even know that there's some kind of grant programs they could participate. They could win these grants. They could pay for their projects. They were just doing this either with a fundraiser helps or by, personal membership subscription or something, whatever the system they had. So this situation, it was quite a game changer.
And do you happen to know if this NGO support was replicated throughout Ukraine, or is it specifically Lviv?
Well, to be honest, I don't know, but I know that in that time, a lot of good practices started to appear. One of them, which I was personally engaged, is a youth worker program. It was organized by the Ministry of Youth and Sport with collaboration and funding of UNDP.
When you say ministry, you mean the national ministry?
Exactly, the national ministry.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So this program was created in 2015 to coach people who were working with youngsters to how to do it properly, essentially. And it was given a specifically training to do it properly and certify those workers. So I was one of the first, I would say, members of this pilot program that participated in the youth worker certification program, and gained my knowledge. But it's a bit of a jump, I would say, towards the story. So in 2015, Andrei Kowalski, who was the head of this department, he invited me for the internship. He just called me.
Internship, did you say?
Internship in his department,
Mm-hmm.
yes. He just called me and he said, well, how are you spending your summer? Again, the same question. I was like, doing nothing, just, hanging around, organizing some projects. He said, do you want to, work in our department just as an internship? It's not going to be paid, but, at least you will spend more time here and you will learn something. Maybe you will have some prospects. And I said, yeah, why not? So I applied on this program. It was a selective program, so it wasn't just easy to apply and then started to work in this department. I needed to pass some interviews. So I passed all this process. I had a 17 years old, I guess, something like that. And I started to have the internship. So during that time, when I was working in his department, I witnessed all of this, forming and collaboration between the organization. It was fascinating to me because people were coming and go.
All the different NGOs locally.
Yeah, entirely different NGOs. There was a religious NGOs, even sometimes patriots, nationalists, something like that, a really huge mix. Or even international NGOs, the one that has international representation. So a huge mix of those NGOs with a kind of a different values in the set, but still they were collaborating. And it was exciting just to see. So then we have witnessed something interesting. On the paper, we found out that to this department, there's one institution, one structure that kind of belongs to this department that we've been working with. It was called Lviv Regional Youth Center. So it's an institution that was working from 2001 and supposed to be a youth center, essentially, all of the meaning of these words. but no one knew about its existence. Literally no one, like zero from the NGOs.
So it was like an empty room somewhere in Lviv.
Exactly. So it was like a ghost organization, but it was funded by the government. I mean, not a lot, but still they had some, they had some working budget. They had the budget for projects and they had the budget for salary for the workers. But we managed to reorganize this youth center. We managed to find a new place for it, essentially in the city center. Before that, we understood, okay, while all this process of finding a physical place is exhausting and, it's really hard to find yourself for the governmental structure, like an office, we started to work on the building a community online. So we organized, some Facebook pages, some websites and etc., just to give people an idea, like, hey, look, like we exist. Let's do something online at least. And we started to gather some, bubble and community around this center that, it works. All of the previous people, they resigned essentially, and the director and the new people stepped in. And I was one of them, essentially, the year after it relaunched. Like, consequentially, time passes and I started to work there. And before we found the place, we've been organizing some online activities, some outside stuff, just building awareness for the people that, this organization exists. But then finally, when we got some help from administration, we got a new place to be. Still, without even like having a possibility just to sit, they were sitting on these mattresses, but still they were having fun because, they could gather in some environment and do their affairs. And it was really, really nice. And the first year, we held, within the first year, 356 events, essentially. Like,
And yoga
including
mats.
all, so like demand was tremendous, tremendous demand from the youngsters community and the NGOs. And consequentially, the youth center started to develop. We had a Peace Corps volunteer. Her name is Catherine, also. So she helped us to write a couple of grants to win some money and to renovate the place, because it was, to be honest, really outdated, like something from the 90s. Like, people that don't care at the time, but we need to have some comfort.
It needed a facelift and some chairs.
Exactly. We need to have some chairs and maybe some projector, right? Because people were shooting some stuff from the laptop, but it's not enough for like 30 people.
Yes.
So Catherine, like, she was really great. As a volunteer, as a Peace Corps, she gave us a really huge lift as an organization with her work, and with the grants she wrote. So we won some funding. We did a renovation, and even this renovation was done by the youngsters. So it wasn't like we hired some worksmiths or someone who was working on the place. Like, the youngsters, after the school, they came to the youth center. They took a brush and started to paint stuff. Obviously, like, something more complicated, like electricity and etc., was done by the professionals.
Yes.
But like, all of this cosmetic stuff was done by the young people themselves. So they built this place for themselves, and they started to value it a lot, because it's something that you kind of put your hand personally.
Yes.
And they became really protective of this place, because the project itself was named the place that empowers. So it was the name of the project. So essentially, they build that place that empowers them to do something, to spend their time after school proactively with either, I would say, not formal education or some lectures, something that just helped them to develop inside of this place. So mostly after the school, after the college, they were going to the youth center and they were spending time over there. So it was amazing times, to be honest.
Can I ask you, just turning to your research then, you're looking at NGOs and communities in areas that were invaded by Russia and taken over, and you've been reclaimed by Ukraine, and you're looking at the return of those communities. Could you just maybe draw a line to your research from your early days, inspiring work with the whole movement of civil society and NGOs in Lviv, and being at the center of the youth movement there and helping create the conditions for that kind of flourishing, to your research, that you do today?
Well, I must admit that, we weren't like a one youth center on the entire country. Well, Ukraine is big, it's like Texas, I guess, on the size. And when we started to work on it, it kind of triggered the chain reaction. A lot of other youth centers started to appear, and they were visiting us for experience, for to see how the things works.
Wonderful.
We were visiting them, so this process started to flourish simultaneously. But especially, it was quite important to have this kind of centers on the eastern part of Ukraine, right? The part that right now the most affected by the war.
Yes.
And within like years,
Where places where young people could go and in safe spaces.
Exactly, and spend some time there with their peers, with some non-formal education, with some nice activities, with developing activities, with some workshops, with some lectures that they are interested in, like just a place that they could spend a good time, essentially.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. So it's inspired me a lot, and I understood what is the power of, community essentially is, right? How powerful communities are, and how it is important to work on creation of the community, how strong the society could be if you have essentially strong community formed on some shared values.
And can I just check one thing that you've been explaining so beautifully? But I just need to check my understanding. So at this point, you're talking to youth groups, you're talking in youth centres, but you're seeing this within the community more broadly rather than just for focusing on youth? Or is that what you're learning?
I learned that, the lectures I did specifically for school kids, like pupils, I learned that already on these places, the community is being formed. Some awareness has been formed essentially. And the people know what they're doing, they know what they hear, and they know the importance of it. How communities are being formed, what affects them, and what is the best way to build the community itself. And then obviously time passes. I see that, war is on the scale, and you know that war hasn't started in 2022, right? It's actually started in 2014.
Yes.
So in those sides on the eastern Ukraine, I had a feeling that, well, obviously something bad is going to happen. Everyone doesn't feel stable over there, right? And it's really important to stay strong, to form somehow of, I would say, maybe resistance. And it turns out to be true, because I started to work on my PhD thesis about local NGOs and community actors in Ukraine before the full-scale invasion, just to learn how these communities that being formed on these sites could play a role to the local resistance, essentially. And unfortunately, with the time, it's been verified to be true that these youth centers and the local activists that was formed and raised by these centers on the sites, they were the one who started to do volunteering, either volunteering in the army or do the humanitarian volunteer, or just to form a resistance to the occupant.
Yes. Only speak about something that's completely safe and free to talk about. And if there isn't anything, then we can change the subject.
So I could just tell you that, the persons I know personally from the cities like Slovyansk, from the cities like Mariupol, that were participants of this kind of initiatives, essentially, that were building this grassroots organizations. There were like volunteers or youth workers, even. They played quite a important role in building the local resistance. They played a tremendous role with helping with the humanitarian needs on the sites. They were one of the first responders, essentially, on the site after the military, because
they knew where everyone was and where all the vulnerable people were. I mean, they must have had such excellent inside knowledge of their own community.
Exactly. It wasn't, like a, let's say, an international organization, like
World Food Program of the UN, that came on the place. They don't know the local situation. They do not know the local people and how the neighborhood is looking like, right?
Yes.
These people are on the side. They know exactly the needs. They know exactly who they need to call to. They know exactly how they should evacuate and how they should form, some of the processes inside. So that's why automatically they've been becoming like a first responders to the situation that was happening. A lot of them has suffered, of course. Some of them lost their lives, and some of them, still under the occupation. So each story is quite different. But the fact is, all of those people that been working on this, let's say, community inside of those cities, they were the first responders and, the civic actors
Yes.
that helped, essentially to resist the occupation.
There's a thread I can't resist pulling, and that's the sense of in peacetime when Ukraine is free of its invader and these lands are back in Ukraine's hands, and that the people that were at the heart of these communities in terms of the kind of community centers you described and the community groups kind of hold that heart of the identity of that community and are able to help create a future for that community because of the fact that there was this community cohesion to start with and this self-reliance and helping each other. And
to work again, and to rebuild this from the ashes, essentially.
Yeah, there must be a very big process ahead of processing collective trauma and community trauma.
You know what? Just one thing, sorry for cutting you off of the ears. Why my notion works? I know it works because when the Russian occupation starts, these people who represent some NGOs or being the local leaders, they are the first target of the Russian forces to be either captured or eliminated. So it's essentially, it's unfortunately in that way, it's proving the idea that these local agents of civic resilience, they're quite fragile in the conflict-affected context, essentially, and because in this situation, these NGOs, as even youth NGOs, they're often, described mainly as the service providers, and the leaders of this organization, the participants of this organization, as being the first responders, often become a target of Russian occupied forces. And I witnessed that a lot. Even one of my colleagues from the university, when I was doing my master's degree in Ukrainian Catholic University on the management of nonprofit organization, this is the name of the program. When he went, he was a representative of one of the local organizations. When he went to the war-affected region, some information being passed through the Russian channels, essentially, and they issued, let's say, a bounty on him. And this is how it works on the two ways. So
there must be a lot of lessons learned on how to protect these people that become targets as well.
And many of them transformed into some foundations that help to buy some equipment for soldiers, that help to build some innovations for the resistance, essentially.
They're very connected to their community, and it's a deep connection. I think it's a really fascinating insight into all the different dimensions of civil society in Ukraine, and you're in such a good position to be able to explain the power of it. So I'm really grateful that you can share that because it has significance anywhere in the role of civil society, the way you describe it and all its different dimensions. I wondered, people sometimes wonder where they have busy lives and they're worried about democratic decline, but they don't really quite know what to do beyond casting a vote sometimes, and they're a little bit unsure how to go about it. Well, you've just given a bit of a masterclass, especially for young people, on how to engage and how to become part of your community and how enjoyable it can be. But I just wanted to ask you, because I always ask this question to all the guests on the podcast, if there's anything else you'd like to share to someone who's living in a democracy that might be under threat, or they can see the threats down the line, and they want to engage. Any particular thing you'd like to share that you haven't already, that they might find helpful or encouraging?
It's quite interesting to just even observe how this process is being quite translucent, how it actually affects the everyday life. And a lot of people cannot just gain the value, why it is important, why it's supposed to be happening, why it exists, and why actually it's supposed to be supported. So for those society that are struggling, it's really important to stay within the course of the value that you represent. This core values, this is your guidance, and losing essentially them is losing yourself, a part of yourself. So the most strongest way to defend it is to build a community with the people, like-minded people, with a shared experience, with the shared values, because it's a critical mass. And as we know, this critical mass could make tremendous changes in every possible society. And we already have these lessons from the history. So work with your local community, support your local community, be a part of it. And just know that it's a backbone of the whole civil society.
And from what you're saying, it brings a lot of purpose to your life.
Oh, definitely is.
Yeah.
It's inspirational work. I never get that much of a life joy in any other work that I was, engaged with, other than just working in the civil societies, let's say civil society part. Why? I don't know. Maybe because this is the way you can feel the most impact. This is the way that you can actually change things and do this impact and feel yourself, powerful in a way that you can really make a change in a better way. So I don't have any other example of the work I was engaged with that gave me this much joy, with working with the people and working for good.
When you talk about it, you sound very, very connected. I wonder about that chap that you didn't really know very well, who kept banging on your door, and eventually he threw you a sleeping bag and forced you to go to camp. Do you still know that guy?
Of course, during the years, he became my best friend, essentially. It's been 16 years or even more that, right now we're communicating daily, just daily with this guy. When we were in school, we didn't even chat a little. We didn't even say hello to each other. Right now, this guy who changed my life, he left the civil society part because he started to reappear, let's say, occasionally, but he made a really strong impact on my life, and we still, to this day, we are connected every day, essentially.
Beautiful. Did he ever explain to you why he picked you? Because you guys hardly knew each other, but he kept calling you and he kept coming and he kept trying to get you out of your shell.
I was asking him, why me? Why you were so persistent? He just told me, I felt like it. I felt like it's like the thing that's supposed to happen. That's why I did it.
He felt instinctively that
Exactly.
you were the one he needed to pester.
Yeah.
Awesome.
That's how I could describe it, yeah.
Beautiful, Arsen. I really appreciate your time, and thanks for sharing your story with us.
Thank you for having me here.
If you enjoyed this episode, please post a review or rating. We're new, and a one-line review has a huge impact in helping others to find us. Thank you for your support.